There is a certain kind of man who never raises his voice. He does not chase attention or trade in noise. He speaks quietly, says exactly what he believes, and steps aside. Usually, the world ignores him. That is exactly what happened to Andrés Iniesta. Months before Lamine Yamal stood in New Jersey with a World Cup winner's medal around his neck, Iniesta had already told everyone what the teenager would become. He said it while injuries piled up, performances dipped, and critics began writing Yamal off before his story had truly begun. Nobody listened. They called it sentimentality from a retired legend protecting Spanish football's golden boy. But Iniesta was not wrong. He was the only one who saw it clearly. On July 19, 2026, against Lionel Messi and Argentina, Yamal answered every doubt on the biggest stage in football. And Iniesta was proven right in the most complete way imaginable. This is the story of what Iniesta saw before everyone else, the injury and pressure that nearly destroyed Yamal's World Cup, and the night the boy nobody believed in became a champion. But to understand why this prediction mattered so much, you first have to understand who was making it. Because Andrés Iniesta is not just some pundit filling airtime. This is the man who scored the most important goal in the history of Spanish football. The winner in the 2010 World Cup final against the Netherlands, deep into extra time. The strike that turned Spain into world champions for the first and only time in their history. A single swing of his boot rewrote a nation's entire identity. Before that goal, Spain were the eternal underachievers, the team with all the talent and none of the trophies. After it, they were kings. And here's the thing about Iniesta. He did it without ever becoming loud. 2 decades at Barcelona, winning everything there was to win, and he did it as the quietest superstar the sport had ever produced. No tantrums, no theatrics. He just played at a level so subtle and so intelligent that even opposing fans stood and applauded him. He retired in 2024, and unlike so many legends who fade into silence, he stayed close to the game. He watched. He studied. He kept his eyes on the 2 shirts he loved most in the world, Barcelona and Spain. And because of who he was, because of what he had done, when Andrés Iniesta looked at a young player and told you something, it carried a weight that almost no other voice in football could match. So when he started talking about Lamine Yamal, people should have paid attention. They did not. Let us go back to where it started. The summer of 2024, at the European Championship in Germany. Yamal was 16 years old. 16. Most kids that age are worried about their exams. This one was terrorizing the best defenders on the continent. He announced himself to the world with a goal against France in the semifinal that seemed to bend the laws of physics, curling into the top corner from an impossible angle. The youngest scorer in the history of the tournament. Youngest to appear at a Euros. Youngest to provide an assist. Youngest to reach a final. By the time Spain lifted the trophy, he had turned 17, a European champion before he could legally drive a car in most of the world. And Iniesta, watching all of it, did not hold back. He said the talent Yamal was showing was spectacular. He said that for a boy of that age, it simply was not normal. That until this kid arrived, football had never seen anything quite like it. He was careful, of course, because Iniesta is always careful. When people pushed him to compare the teenager to Lionel Messi, he refused to overreach. He said Messi was the best in the world and that Yamal was only at the very beginning of his journey. But the message underneath was unmistakable. This was not just another good young player. This was something rare. Something that comes along once in a generation, if you are lucky. Most people nodded along because at that moment, in the glow of a European title, it was easy to agree. Everybody loves a wonder kid when he is winning, but football has a short memory and a long knife, and the mood was about to change. By March of 2026, with the World Cup on the horizon, Iniesta went further than he ever had before. Asked about Yamal again, this time he did not soften it. He said the boy had incredible talent and that he possessed the potential to become a truly unique player in the history of the sport. Not a good player, not a great player, a unique one. One of a kind. And then Iniesta said the thing that would come to define this entire story. He said Spain's fortunes at the World Cup would hinge on Lamine Yamal, that the future of the national team itself was tied to how decisive this teenager could be in the biggest matches. If Yamal could produce the moments that decided games when the pressure was at its absolute peak, then Spain had every chance of adding a second star above their crest, 16 years after his own goal put the first one there. Now, pay very close attention to the exact shape of that prediction, because this is where almost everyone got it wrong. Iniesta did not promise a hat trick every game. He did not promise that Yamal would finish as the tournament's top scorer or fill a highlight reel with individual brilliance. That is not what he said, and it is not what he meant. He was not predicting numbers. He was predicting influence. He was predicting a player who would bend entire matches around himself, whether or not the score sheet ever gave him credit for it. And it was a precise, deeply informed prediction from the one man on earth most qualified to make it. And the football world was about to spend an entire tournament proving they had not understood a word of it. Because the moment the World Cup arrived, everything that could go wrong for Lamine Yamal started to go wrong. It began with his body. Late in the 2025 to 2026 season, in the closing weeks of another title-winning campaign for Barcelona, Yamal tore his hamstring. What looked at first like a minor knock turned out to be far more serious, forcing him to miss the end of Barcelona's season and throwing his involvement in the World Cup, the tournament he had dreamed about his whole young life, into genuine doubt. The boy who was supposed to light up the biggest stage in sport was instead lying on a treatment table, watching the clock, hoping his leg would hold. He made it to the tournament, barely. And when Spain opened their campaign against Cape Verde, Yamal was not in the starting 11. He was on the bench, a substitute, easing his way back, and Spain, without their talisman firing, stumbled to a lifeless goalless draw. 0-0. The favorites, the European champions, the team everyone had installed as the standout pick to win the whole thing, could not break down Cape Verde. And that was the moment the narrative turned. Because if you build a team around a 19-year-old, and that 19-year-old is hobbled, then suddenly everybody has an opinion. The whispers started immediately. Was Spain too dependent on one kid? Had they made a catastrophic mistake tying their entire tournament to a teenager with a fragile hamstring? Fans across the world started saying it out loud, that the pressure being heaped on this boy was too much, that you could not build an entire national team on the shoulders of an 18-year-old and expect it to hold. He was just a child, they said. Leave him alone. Stop asking him to carry a country. Yamal started every match after that opener. But he was, by his own admission and by the eye test of everyone watching, a gear off. Spain got through the group stage against Saudi Arabia and Uruguay and finished top. But the boy who had torn Europe apart at 16 looked human. He looked tired. He looked like a player still fighting his own body. And the numbers that everybody loves to point at told a damning story. 1 goal, that was it. 1 goal and not a single assist. The critics did not need any more than that. The words started appearing everywhere, in headlines, on broadcasts, across social media. Overhyped. Was Lamine Yamal overhyped? Had the football world talked itself into a legend that did not actually exist? They lined his numbers up against the great teenage tournament performers of the past, and on paper, they made him look ordinary. And it was not only the football, the scrutiny had spilled far beyond the pitch. For months, media outlets had spent extraordinary energy digging into his private life, his relationships, his dating history, treating a teenager's personal business as international news. There had been the controversy when comments he made about a fierce rival club dragged him into a war of words he did not need. There was a constant, ugly tug-of-war between Barcelona and Spain over his fitness. It got so bad that one of the biggest names in the sport went on television and said, plainly, that people needed to leave the kid alone, that you could see his pure passion for football, and that the rest of it was nobody's business. Even Yamal's own father was forced to step in, hitting back at the critics, insisting his son had done nothing wrong. This was the storm. A 19-year-old carrying an injury, carrying a nation, carrying a level of fame that would have crushed most grown men. And everywhere he turned, another voice telling him he was not good enough. Even inside his own camp, the doubt crept in. Spain's captain, one of the most respected players in the world, said he hoped the young man would prove he was one of the very best on the planet in the matches that mattered most. Read that carefully. That is not the same as saying he already had. It was a challenge wrapped in politeness. Even his own captain was, in the gentlest possible way, telling him he had not done it yet. The critics wrote their columns. One prominent piece framed it as a World Cup Lamine Yamal still owed Spain. Owed. As if he were in debt. As if the boy who had already given a nation so much was somehow failing to pay it back. His tournament, they said, had fallen well short of the standard he had set at the Euros, and Spain needed a better version of their teenage star if they had any hope of lifting the trophy. And through all of it, one voice remained completely unmoved. Iniesta did not walk it back. He did not distance himself. He did not quietly pretend he had never made the prediction. He kept saying the same thing he had always said, that Yamal was the key, that Spain's chances rested on how decisive this young man could become when the tournament reached its sharpest edge. He was the only prominent voice in the entire game who refused to abandon the boy. And the reason he refused was that he understood better than anyone alive exactly what he was looking at. He was not watching the box score. He was watching the football. But belief is easy to hold when there is time left. And Spain were running out of it. Because as the knockout rounds arrived, the whispers about Yamal's fitness only grew louder. Spain ground their way through the bracket, past Austria, past Belgium, past France in the semi-final, but their young star still had not delivered the signature, tournament-defining explosion everyone was waiting for. And then, in the days before the final itself, the alarm bells started ringing at full volume. At a training session that week, while the rest of the squad went through their drills, Yamal was spotted lying on a mat off to the side, stretching, nursing something. And on his left thigh, for all the cameras to see, there was a bandage. The same leg, the same hamstring that had haunted his entire tournament. The whole football world held its breath and asked the same terrifying question. Would Lamine Yamal even be fit to play in the World Cup final? Would the injury rob him of the one moment that could define his entire young career? The first ever meeting with his childhood idol on the grandest stage the sport can offer? The doubters felt vindicated. Of course, this was how it would end. The overhyped kid, the fragile teenager, breaking down at the final hurdle, unable to answer the one question that mattered. They had been saying it for weeks. The body could not carry the burden the country had placed on it. Iniesta had said the opposite for months. Now, at last, there was nowhere left to hide. The final would settle it, once and for all. Sunday, the 19th of July, 2026, East Rutherford, New Jersey. The New York-New Jersey Stadium, packed to the rafters, the eyes of billions fixed on a single field. Spain against Argentina. The reigning European champions against the reigning world champions. And at the heart of it, the storyline the entire planet had been dreaming of for 2 years. Lionel Messi against Lamine Yamal. The greatest player of his generation, perhaps of all time, against the boy anointed to inherit his throne. The master against the apprentice. And every single person watching knew the subplot underneath it. This was the game that would decide whether Andrés Iniesta had been a visionary or a fool. Yamal played. Whatever that bandage had been hiding, whatever pain he was carrying, he took the field in the World Cup final. And what happened over the next 120 minutes was not the kind of thing that shows up when you skim the highlights the next morning. It was something far more important and far more revealing. It was, in fact, the exact thing Iniesta had been trying to tell everyone all along. Argentina came to that final with one plan, and one plan only. Stop Yamal. Stop Spain. They dropped deep, packed their defense, and committed everything to survival. And here is the number that tells the whole story. In 120 minutes of World Cup final football, Argentina did not register a single shot on target. Not one. In the entire first half, they did not manage a single touch inside the Spanish penalty box. Built around the best player of all time, they were suffocated so completely they could barely cross the halfway line with any menace. And why was there so much space for Spain to dominate? Look at how Argentina defended Yamal. Nearly every time the ball came near him, they sent two men to deal with him. Two defenders, permanently occupied by a 19-year-old who had supposedly been having a quiet tournament. And every time they doubled up on him, they left someone else free. That is the influence that never lands in a box score. That is a player warping the entire shape of a World Cup final simply by existing on the pitch, forcing the opposition to commit extra bodies to his side and opening the door for everyone else in a Spain shirt. The individual battle was just as telling. Messi, the great Messi, finished with just 15 touches of the ball, starved and smothered by a Spanish side that never let him breathe. Yamal had 26. The teenager was more involved in the World Cup final than the greatest player who ever lived. The apprentice, on the biggest night of them all, outplayed the master. Still, the game hung in an unbearable balance. 90 minutes came and went with no goal. And then, deep in the dying moments of normal time, the dam began to crack. An Argentine midfielder, frustrated, lunged into a challenge on one of Spain's young defenders, Pau Cubarsí, and flipped him into the air and hard onto the turf. His second yellow card of the night. A red. Argentina, already clinging on for their lives, would have to survive extra time a man down, and they could not. In the 106th minute, with Argentina down to 10 men and Spain pressing relentlessly through the space Yamal's gravity had been creating all night, the substitute Ferran Torres struck. One goal, the only goal the match would ever need. Spain won. Argentina nil. When the final whistle blew, Lamine Yamal dropped to his knees and pointed to the sky. 16 years after Andrés Iniesta scored the goal that made Spain champions of the world, a teenager had helped them do it again. And with that medal, Yamal became the first teenager in the history of football to win both the European Championship and the World Cup. He had turned 19 in the middle of the tournament, already before he could even be called a man. One of the most decorated players the sport had ever seen. And then came the moment that told you everything about who this kid actually is, underneath all the noise the world had wrapped around him. While his teammates lost themselves in celebration, Yamal broke away from the party. He walked, alone, across the field, straight toward the one man standing still amid the chaos, trying to process the worst night of his professional life. Lionel Messi, his idol, the player he had grown up worshipping, the reason he ever picked up a football. And in the middle of the greatest triumph of his young life, Lamine Yamal went to Messi and embraced him. He told him he was sorry. That was all. Not a word of gloating, not a shred of arrogance. Just a 19-year-old, holding the man he had spent his childhood dreaming of becoming, telling him he was sorry for his pain. The image went around the world in seconds. The passing of the baton, right there on the grass from one era to the next. The player who had defined the last 20 years of football, handing it in a single embrace to the boy who would define the next 20. Now, here is where the critics tried one last time to be right. Because when the medals were handed out, they looked at Yamal's tournament stat line, and there it was, exactly as they had mocked for weeks. 1 goal. No assists, 8 appearances, and some of them actually stood up on the very night Spain became world champions and asked again whether the kid had really lived up to the hype. And that is the precise moment Andrés Iniesta was proven completely, devastatingly right. Because Iniesta never promised numbers. Go back to his words. He said Yamal would be decisive. He said the team's fortunes would hinge on how much difference the young man could make in the biggest matches. He said Yamal had the potential to become a truly unique player. And in the World Cup final, a 19-year-old with a bandaged hamstring pulled two defenders out of shape on every touch, held the ball up under a mountain of pressure, dominated the greatest player of all time in the involvement stakes, and warped the architecture of the game so completely that the opposition could not muster a single shot on target across 2 hours of football. That is not a quiet tournament. That is a masterclass in the kind of influence that only the truly unique players in history are capable of. It just does not fit inside the columns that lazy analysis loves to count. Iniesta understood this because he had lived it. He knew from personal experience that the man who decides a World Cup is not always the man with the gaudiest statistics, and that real greatness is sometimes invisible to the people who only know how to read a scoreboard. He looked at Lamine Yamal, and he did not see a boy with a thin stat line. He saw a player bending the game to his will, exactly what the rest of the world was too distracted and too obsessed with numbers to see. And consider the record Yamal was quietly assembling underneath all the criticism. By the end of that tournament, Spain had extended their unbeaten run to 38 matches, the longest streak ever put together by any European or South American nation in the history of the game. And here is the statistic that should have silenced every doubter forever. In every single one of the 28 matches Lamine Yamal has played for Spain, the national team has never lost. Not once. And in all 13 matches he has started for his country, Spain have won every time. That is not the record of an overhyped kid. That is the fingerprint of a player who changes the outcome of games simply by being on the pitch, which is, word for word, precisely what Iniesta had been telling everyone for 2 full years. The man who never raised his voice had been right the entire time. Right when they said the injury would break him. Right when they said Spain had built their dream on the wrong shoulders. Right when they counted his goals and called him ordinary. Right when his own captain, in the kindest way possible, told him he had not done it yet. Through all of it, one quiet legend held the line. And at the very end, on the biggest stage the sport has to offer, the boy he believed in walked off the field a world champion, the youngest dual king football had ever crowned. Andrés Iniesta was right about Lamine Yamal, right about the talent, right about the uniqueness, right about the influence, right about the destiny. And the beautiful, poetic truth of it is that the only person who could have seen it so clearly was the one man who had already lived that exact story himself. The quiet genius who once won a World Cup for Spain without ever needing to shout about it recognized, instantly, another quiet genius who would do the same. It takes one to know one. The doubters have gone quiet now. The headlines have changed their tune. Everyone suddenly always knew Lamine Yamal was destined for this. But you and I both know the truth. When it mattered, when the whole world was against him, when the knives were out and the noise was deafening, there was only one voice that never wavered. And it belonged to the man who understood, before anybody else, that the rarest players in history are the ones the crowd is too busy doubting to properly see. If you enjoyed this deep dive, do me a favor and hit that like button, and subscribe to the channel for more stories from the beautiful game. Until next time.